Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the podcast Strikes Back. My name is George and you're listening to our review of Toy Story 4 with the boys Connor
Hello.
and Benny.
Hi there.
Well folks, here we are for the fourth entry into the Toy Story franchise that kicked off in 1995 and a very influential franchise. It is the first feature-length film to be entirely produced in computer animation and also very, very critically acclaimed with, according to Rotten Tomatoes, by their standards, the most critically acclaimed franchise of all time with an average of 99.3%
Pretty good.
on the platform, followed by Before Sunrise trilogy and then the Dollars trilogy and Lord of the Rings, hovering around about that 95%. So, hey, we thought it was all over. 2010, we thought it was all over with Toy Story 3, and now we're here for Toy Story 4. We're into the non-spoiler part of the review, spoiler part of the review. And what we like to do, guys, is we like to give a little bit of context to our feelings towards the franchise and also, how are you feeling towards the trailers itself. So, Connor, why don't you give us a little bit of a roundup of your Toy Story experience so far?
Sure. So Toy Story... Oh, this might be inaccurate, but I think Toy Story would probably have been the start of not only my, love of this franchise, but also my real love of Pixar in general. Was there a Pixar film before?
No, that was their first.
Did you listen to the intro?
No, never.
Absolutely not.
I can read the Wikipedia page later. Yeah, and so I have a deep love for this franchise, and for for many years, anything that Pixar put out, I was kind of in love with. I think that Toy Story was one of those films as a kid that I would just rewatch, religiously. Like that was one of those films that you could probably have gotten warped on VHS. Every kind of sequel to that has been impressive in my book. So number 2, I really enjoyed. 3 was one of those things where I was really worried about that film when I first went and saw it. I was thinking, they have this perfect kind of first and second film. At that time, Pixar for me was not as do no wrong, as it had been in previous years. So I was super nervous about that, and the way that they kind of pulled it off, they like that for me was kind of, I felt like getting away with murder. The fact that third one was good, and so when very soon after that they kind of confirmed a fourth, I kind of felt like, what are you guys doing? You've won, you've done it, you've done the trilogy. Don't go back into that. Back to that area. So coming into the actual fourth one, both my uneasiness had to do with, the fact that they had already done 3 good ones. I don't want them to, risk, not batting for 1,000. And also the fact that I haven't felt the same kind of pedigree from Pixar as, kind of in its early days. And when something comes out from Pixar nowadays, it's kind of almost a gamble. You're going to are we going to get some of that flair that they had in those golden years, or are we going to get like a Cars 4 type fiasco? And that for me was really scary as well. Trailers, were kind of neither here nor there for me. It was just kind of different setting. But I think it was more overall the context around it that made me a bit nervous about this film.
I love Cars 4, eh?
Honestly, I have no idea what they're at to anymore.
Me neither. Maybe it is Cars 4.
Could be. 3 was the last one.
Okay. And then they've got some other spin-offs, don't they? Like the planes.
Disney released planes.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. How about you, Benny? Were you into it when you were a kid, when it first came out?
Yeah, absolutely. I still have at home my Woody doll, like the kind of exact one from the movie almost.
Kids with those, like I remember growing up, if kid had like a full-size Woody doll or a full-size, like that was the coolest thing.
Yeah. Well, then just a few years ago, a friend actually gave me a Buzz to go with it. So
really?
Yeah.
I
got Slinky Dog as well. So yeah, I had the first 2 on VHS, and back in the day, you kids, you don't remember videotapes. That'd cost like $50. you get 3 in your whole lifetime. So I watched those movies ad nauseum. The third one, of course, exact same feelings going into it and coming out of it. Now though, I feel the third one for me is a little bit like up in that it's primarily remembered for like one really emotional scene, and the rest of it's a little bit of a blur, to be honest. I only have very strong positive feelings towards it, but the other two I can recite almost. So it's I haven't gone back to watch it in too long. I got to give it another go. And then with the trailers coming into this one, the first trailer I think possibly as a consequence of just how much I didn't want them to be doing this and hadn't for the entire 2-year news cycle of them saying they were, was not very pleased with, and I warmed to them since then. I distinctly remember thinking using God Only Knows, the Beach Boys song, was just cheating because that shit's so good. But I was trying to be very careful with my expectations on this.
Yeah. I the VHS warping was my experience with Toy Story as a kid. 1 and 2, man. I just tore those to shreds in the VHS player. I absolutely loved those movies. And I love what they did with the second one. I think very subconsciously, I wasn't, when did that come out? Like, let's have a look quickly. But that one really seemed like a different kind of sequel. So that was 1999. Okay, so 4 years after the first one. And I don't know, it just seemed like a different kind of sequel. It appealed to me in a very different type of way. And then the third one came out and we were sort of, growing up on it now in 2010, sort of as an adult coming to it. And once again, it spoke to me on another level. And it's kind of like growing up with the Harry Potter books. It's kind of like you were the same age as Harry Potter and felt like Toy Story was like not the same age, but it was addressing our generation very specifically, and it spoke to me. So then when it came to this one, like number 4, it sort of seemed to be like a similar sentiment to you, Connor. You've done the miracle run is there. Just leave it. You've done an amazing thing. Call it a day. And alas, they went forward with it. And the trailers seemed very, very by the numbers to me. It didn't feel like it had that spark. It didn't have that, oh my God, a new Toy Story film's coming. But obviously that comes with all that baggage that I mentioned before. So it was sort of, I wasn't expecting much. But then the reviews start coming out. And everyone's saying, Toy Story 4, baby. The funniest in the franchise I'm hearing. And also one of the best entries. So then I go into this one today in Toy Story 4 at the end of the day, like, okay, maybe this is going to be great. Maybe they're going to continue delivering the goods. Anyway, let's get into the non-spoiler part of the review now. First thing off the bat, I think this is kind of a given with any Pixar. It's like it looks beautiful.
So there's a scene very early on. For me, it was really distinctive because of how good it was.
The rain outside?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It looked really, really good.
And the depth of field that they're able to get, like what is in focus and what's out of focus, it just looks absolutely gorgeous.
It looks as though there is an actual camera.
Yes.
Filming these things happening.
They really started doing that with WALL-E years back when they got Roger Deakins on to be like a cinematography consultant. Yeah, and ever since then I've noticed their movies just look better and better.
And it's interesting because you talk about depth of field, and you can have live action films that don't have that level of depth of field. Marvel is a particularly kind of repeat offender on that case because of, it's the nature of that. They have so many green screens, and that it's a lot of time and effort that goes into just getting the bare minimum for those films. But it ends up looking quite flat. Whereas I feel like this movie, from a visual level, on the execution side, is
there was a
really
shot in this movie that almost looked like a split diopter shot with a character really close up in the foreground and one in the background, and they're both in focus. And contrasting that to like how much they were playing with focus in other scenes, it was really cool, like clearly intentional.
Yeah, and the texturing on the characters, like this is the best looking Toy Story film, no doubt.
Easily, yeah. Well, I had certainly criticized a lot from the trailers, the look of certain characters.
You were criticizing though more so the animation style as opposed to the aesthetics of it, correct?
No, to me they looked like actual living beings, whereas
Yeah.
I thought in previous films they looked like toys. But watching this one on the big screen, my God, they looked like the detail. They were so clearly made of different materials, and
Bo Peep looks like she's made of porcelain, whereas
Yeah.
like Woody looks like he's made of plastic. Like there's a very
Yeah.
distinct difference between
and when it
the
gets
two.
in close, you can really see that.
Yeah,
They look like toys.
That's the part that really amazes me when they zoom in on this, on characters or items or whatever it is. I mean, they're not afraid to do that in this film. It looks really, really, really spectacular, and I think that's really impressive. What did it for me? Forky, I thought looked, and anyone that's watched the trailer will have seen that. But his hands, I was absolutely fascinated by his hands because they looked like photorealistic.
Yeah, there's a bit where his hand comes into frame specifically.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking
And
about.
I was like, whoa, that looks like, what's that? What's a pipe cleaner?
cleaner,
I mean, it looks like they just got a pipe cleaner and then just
Legit.
like that was like they just we'll do one scene
Yeah.
that's actually like just they filmed it
Yeah,
live
yeah,
action
yeah.
and we'll see if anyone notices.
Yeah, it totally. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
It's very impressive. So from a rendering perspective, Pixar's going to deliver, and they
Nobody's
definitely
got more
delivered.
processing power than this movie, okay?
7 million, 20 million terabytes. And then also, I think following up from that, just the visual style, the character designs, the Key and Peele, Ducky and the Bunny, like they in particular, I love the way those guys look. They just, I've got some other opinions about certain things there, but like the look of all the toys, with the new characters, Forky, Keanu Reeves' character, Captain
Duke
Canada.
Kaboom.
Dude, kaboom.
Awesome. Like I really, really enjoyed the design work in this, and then the execution of the characters as well, and the animation to bring them to life. That really was a great success of this film for me.
I was never overly worried about that aspect of this film, though. I mean, Pixar has never. Well, I mean, they've been great because of the visual styling, but that has never really been for me what has set them aside from other films. Because I mean, Cars looked great, but to me, that was a failure on Pixar's level, just because that movie
The storytelling
felt,
level.
Yeah, that movie felt commercial.
Cars 3 was like photorealistic. That looked like NASCAR.
They looked absolutely amazing, but there's something about the Pixar films that it just seems to have an enormous amount of heart, and that's really where I wanted this movie to excel, which I guess kind of brings us to what we can see as like our next point.
A crossroad in the review.
Well, yeah, because we've just seen this. We drove from the theater to here almost in near silence because I don't think any of us wanted to give away what we were thinking.
But we always
how
do
we
that.
felt.
It's like, I love it. It's like everyone's saving their thoughts for the
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
Computing.
I think that in terms of like the main conflict, I guess the main plot point, I didn't want them to, I guess, retrace old steps too heavily. I think that I wanted something, if they're going to do a fourth one, I wanted something a little bit fresh. And I think that they did a good job of that. I think that they picked a problem or a conflict. I don't want to get into spoilers or anything like that, so I'm trying to be as vague as possible, but I thought the main driver behind the story was a solid one. I think that there were times where they tried to milk it a little bit too much. I think that they were trying to, I mean, there's a lot of things that Pixar has to live up to in this film, because with their last film, everyone was talking about how they bawled their eyes out in this scene and they were terrified in another, and some really heightened emotions. So I think that this movie may have overreached in those particular scenes, but on a whole, I thought that the general plot points were pretty good.
Yeah. So I think that some of the conceptually, and there's definitely some really good work in Toy Story 4 in terms of some of the themes and where they take certain characters, Woody and Buzz, and where they are in their toy life cycle or whatever you'd call it. But I don't know, man. Like I said to you guys in the car driving over, I thought like this is one where I'd actually like a day to sort of sit there and process it.
Yeah.
But
we'll release a second review in a week and update our thoughts.
But there was just something about it that seemed very, very forced. And it was something that I was worried about with this whole concept is like, we got to kind of dig for some more material to talk about these toys. And the material that was uncovered in that excavation was, to me, below par, and below par of where the others sit. And
It's
I'm
certainly
trying to
not.
keep it vague.
It's certainly not on. Like, I think it's not on par with the first three. I don't think as a whole this really feels as though it certainly doesn't tug on the heartstrings the way number 3 did. It doesn't, I think
number 2, man, like Jesse's song, man. I remember that hit. Like, I remember being a kid, man, and like my eyes were welling up, and I'm like, that's hitting me in the feels, dude.
Yeah.
And there was nothing in here that got remotely close.
Yeah, no, I don't think that, and that's what I kind of mean. Like I think they tried for some of those moments, and I think that it almost feels like a panic where they're like, we need this to work. We need something that's going to like hook people in. And I don't think that it quite landed, which can make it feel a bit uneasy.
They never resorted to like full-on emotional manipulation or anything, though,
No.
which you can not unfairly accuse the third one of doing.
Yeah.
It worked like gangbusters, but it was very over the top.
But that's kind of
that's
a
the
risk.
final in the it's final in the trilogy. It's like that they
No, it's the third movie in 4 movies, George.
Yeah.
Hey.
Final nothing, George.
Do you know what I mean though? Like, they held out, they bring the scene in there, it's at the end of the film, boom, and that's it.
I mean, they even they went at tugged heartstrings in the middle of or towards the end of the film, I suppose. I mean, there's two. No, in the last one.
Oh.
There's 2 scenes in that in number 3 that are. I mean, if you haven't seen it, then I mean, we can talk spoilers. The trash scene and him giving away his toys scene. Those 2 are kind of pivotal moments in that film that everyone remembers. And I think that this movie attempted to have some of those moments, but didn't quite. And that for me is probably where this movie doesn't live up to the 3 that have preceded it.
Where are you sitting on those kind of things, Benny?
I don't know. That's all completely fair. I can't argue with any of that. It didn't feel like it was just, I don't know, maybe reaching as high as the previous couple even, and therefore wasn't a failure in that regard. But
unambitious, I would call it. I would actually call this one like
I'd even
non-distinct compared to the other 2. And
I'd
granted, it's actually probably got more new characters in it than any other one. However, I feel like Toy Story 1, 2, and 3 each had a very clear thread. This one has a clear thread, but it gets lost within a few other murky elements where there's this adventure going on, and they're kind of going here and going there, and it's sort of like these little micro adventures that don't really add up to anything that profound. And that's where the weakness of the film came to me, was like these little components, they're fine on their own, but like, what are we doing here? Like, what is this actually adding to the Toy Story narrative?
There are some things that I think that this movie did take a risk on and did do very interestingly. And I mean,
there's no doubt. There's so many. There's interesting things with ventriloquist dummies. Like, there's some really interesting stuff.
I mean, more in terms of like, kind of exploring kind of the mechanics of the world and doing things that I don't think the other films had quite done. I mean, nothing that would really kind of make it stand out. But I thought that I think that they took a very measured approach to this film.
Yeah, I just think this movie's very intentionally smaller in scope than the prior one.
That's fine.
Like, this is really, I found the other ones to be much more ensemble pieces. This is really a story about Woody and pretty much Woody alone.
It totally is.
Yeah, and I think in what it does with that story is interesting and successful. I like that they took the where it kind of ended with the last one and kind of expanded on it and even rebuked it in some ways, like kind of went in a different direction with the whole thing. And I don't know, that kind of fits in with this series as kind of different stages of life.
Yeah.
Themes, you know?
No, it's very interesting. It's some of those decisions were, you know, like, as you said, rebuked it, changed direction. You know, you didn't expect certain things, but there was just something really lacking here for me. And I was, I think that the Woody story was an interesting way to go, but I wanted so much more. Like I wanted, like it just felt almost like a level of. It almost felt like a level of like corporate laziness in a certain way here, where it was just like leveraging the IP. It was kind of like everything that I was kind of worried about with this.
I think that, I mean, for me, this is very much like we've been spoiled with this series so far. I mean, every movie has brought something kind of spectacular to the table. And so anything short of the pedigree that we've come to expect from this franchise and from Pixar in general is not going to do this movie any favors. So I'd probably want to contextualize it in that. If this was its own movie and it was like a Pixar original type thing, I'm sure it'd be, we'd probably be singing its praises. But I think within the context of it being part of that franchise, it doesn't live up to what's come before. I mean, I will say one area that it might have exceeded potentially is how funny it was. And I think that on pretty much all cylinders, I really found this movie funny.
Yeah, I got a lot of chuckles out. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I found it mostly on par with the other ones, I feel.
Yeah. It might just be that it's been probably a little while since I've seen any of the others.
Yeah.
At least a year. So it's not quite as fresh in my mind, but I found myself laughing a lot in this film.
Yeah, I think I'm just feeling a little flat today. I wasn't sitting there chuckling as much as you. There were one or two good laughs. But
yeah, you were chuckling the most.
Oh yeah, I don't know what it was.
It was all the Canada jokes.
Yeah, I did love all the Canada jokes.
I guess the way I feel about this just right now, coming right out of it, is that there's a Toy Story trilogy, and then there's this just kind of interesting little coda, this little epilogue that's just about Woody. And I don't know if that's the best direction. I don't know. I kind of like how intimate this one is, though.
Yeah, I think conceptually this movie's, it's a good idea, and I think that like I said, all the basic plot points are there. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing particularly, it's not a huge risk on their part, but it's perfectly acceptable the way that they went about it.
And it makes sense within the narrative. Like there's some interesting ideas, but ultimately Toy Story 4 is like exactly what it felt. I was worried it was going to be. It was going to be a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. And there you go. And it's kind of like a little bit like, hey, why didn't you just leave it? Yes, I will agree with you. If you look at it, that's actually that's probably the best way to look at it, as like a little epilogue, a little like final last chapter, or like a little side story.
Yeah. Hey, are you curious about what happened to Woody and the gang after the trilogy? Well, check this out.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
There's also some things in here that deal with the sentience of toys and what ultimately is a toy, and what its motives, and what is its why does it
Welcome
exist?
To the Philosophy Podcast.
Why does it exist? And some things in here I've just like I didn't quite get, and it didn't quite resonate with me.
They run right up to the line of like questioning this world too much, to the point where you're like, wait, what does any of this mean? How does any of this work?
It's just like the concept, guys. The concept was there's toys and they come to life. Like if we kind of deconstruct it too much, it kind of starts to all fall apart, and you go, what are these fucking little dudes that walk around? Like, what is all this bullshit? So we'll get into that more in spoilers, but there's just something there for me that kind of undid and unraveled a few things that are sort of quite important for the foundations of this franchise. I don't know if you guys felt the same way there, but there was just...
It didn't bother me any more than it has in the other films, which is not too much, but interesting.
I don't think it was a problem in the other films. I felt like it was more of a problem in this film with the way they address certain things.
So I would say in the first movie, you can pretty easily come out of it and be like, why did Buzz, who thought he was a space ranger, keep pretending he was a toy, or keep going still when humans came? And that's kind of like, you don't pull that thread, because the whole thing falls apart. And I don't think anything in this was any worse than that.
Yeah, it's less so like those little mechanics of like, and then more so actually in like these characters and how they look at life and where they're heading in their life and the decisions they make in the story.
I actually kind of liked, from that perspective, I quite liked what they did. They kind of built a mythos around, toys that had owners, and, this kind of like concept of lost toys, kind of the freedom that toys may or may not.
Yeah, they showed a really nice new perspective on basically a scenario that would formerly only be villain characters in the series. Like they showed a bit more of a spectrum to it, like a bit more.
Yeah, even the Toy Story 3 villain
Yeah.
went down that exact path.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a good addition to that world. I think, which is kind of what I was talking about when I said they explored some things that had previously not really been explored that much. Which again, I think that was really cool. Should we? I'm not sure if we can talk much about Tom Hanks' performance or Alan's performance or anything like that, because I thought that was pretty on par with the rest of the series. He didn't,
They were
do
good.
anything.
Yeah, none of them. Tom Hanks sounded clearly a lot older
He really did,
at
man.
certain points, but
Well, so did Buzz for me. Like Buzz didn't sound quite right.
And he sounded, and he was very sidelined in this movie.
Yeah.
oh yeah. Yeah,
That was a
completely.
big disappointment for me.
I was really distracted as well by like several of the original cast members are dead at this point.
Yeah.
Like Jim Varney and Don Rickles, Potato Head and Slinky. They're both gone. They're both in this movie. They have lines. Some of it's just reused stuff. I think some's impersonations. And it's just like, do we need them here? Like, just leave them at home or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
bit
there's
morbid.
also a few things here where they've retrofitted a few extra elements, let's call them, to Buzz and Woody. And it's sort of like, really? Like, it's not a big deal. It really isn't. This is a nitpick. This is no doubt a nitpick. And we'll get into it in spoilers. I'm being purposefully vague. But there's things, and I'm like, oh, man, really?
Well, why don't we save it for spoilers?
Yeah.
In terms of that, the reason that I was talking about the cast was because I did want to bring up Key and Peele, who I thought a lot of people, you either were really excited to see Key and Peele in this, or you were fairly cynical.
Well, the
about
marketing
those characters.
focused on them very heavily.
Yeah, and which made me a little bit cynical going in. I'm thinking like, oh, they've just gotten like, let's find two funny people and let them riff or do something like that. But I think that it was a good move on their part. I think that they provided a lot of really good comedy. And I think some of their stuff was, I'd say, the funniest in the film. It's certainly the most laughs that I had.
Yeah, there's one in particular towards the end that is just
On point.
like, why wasn't that earlier in the film, guys?
Yeah, I would
You're
say
the
for the
one
most
the
part they were really well utilized. And I was definitely I didn't really like any of their material in the promotional stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why a lot of people might have gone into that thinking like fairly cynically that they've just gotten, two funny guys and put them in.
Yeah, there was something about Tom Hanks's. He didn't have that flamboyance that he has normally with that Woody character. Like there was less sort of like, and maybe that's the character.
Yeah,
maybe
it's a tired Woody in this.
but like, it's just not the same. And maybe that's just me. Get over it, motherfucker. But I don't know. It seemed a bit off to me. It was
say
just
that
off kilter in a
'cause
weird way.
we keep talking about the life cycle of toys and kids growing up and all that, and I think that in a way just beyond the practical nature of that Tom Hanks is older. I think it also works in terms of the character because the character is in a far kind of more mature place in their life.
Yeah.
Life cycle. Anyway, should we? I don't know how else we can talk about this without being like overly vague. So, do we want to jump into spoilers after we give our general thoughts?
Let's do a wrap up and launch in it.
I'll offer to go first.
Get in there.
Please.
Sweet. Overall, I think that this film is what I would say is really solid. There's nothing about this film that I felt was deeply disappointing or egregious or offensive. I think that there are some really outrageously funny bits in this. I was generally pleased with the way I think the best thing I can say about this is that they didn't muck it up. But having said that, I don't think it is on par with the past three films. This is one film that I kind of almost wish that we had spent some more time thinking about because my brain is a little bit. Yeah, I don't know really what to think of it
it's
yet.
Fresh.
There'll be plenty of time to talk about it in the coming weeks. It's going to be an absolute monster in the box office.
Easily.
Benny?
Yeah, I found this movie to be very pleasant, and the back end just like it, or just specifically the very end, just very charming. I also wouldn't really put it. it's weird for me. I guess those first two movies kind of have their own place. Even the first one on its own. I think it
Yeah.
was one of the very first movies I ever saw in the cinema. And they're so deeply entrenched in my childhood. That third one is a very specific point in time as well. But this one's definitely its own thing after all that. And I would kind of put it closer to Monsters University and like Finding Dory, which I know you're certainly more critical of. I think they're both very charming movies.
Yeah, I said about
that
the same.
that I have no major complaints about. And that's not an amazing recommendation, but like you said, they didn't mess it up, and that's not the biggest thing you hoped for.
Yeah,
going into this,
it could have been a lot worse.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really think this is just a really nice little movie, and I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess for me, nice little movie does not cut it, man. This is quite disappointing from my end, and it's almost for me. It's
Believe
like,
the hype.
to see a couple of those reviews trickle out on Facebook, and I didn't read any, but you get the
100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh my god! And it's like fuck yeah, this is going to be, and then to get this, and for me, it's sort of like this is not a worthwhile exercise, Pixar.
So I mean, like you would say that this is better than, for example, Incredibles 2, right?
Yes, I would say this is above Finding Dory. I would say if we're going to say Toy Story 1 to 3 is a 9 out of 10, a 10 out of 10, Toy Story 4 is a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. They didn't fuck it up. I agree with you guys. They didn't. It's not a train wreck, but it feels like just like a limp little like.
Maybe they'll put that on the DVD cover. It's
limp
not a
little-
train wreck. It's just a limp little
Like I that's where I'm at with this, man. It's like
That's fair.
it's not, as I said, it's a 6 out of 10, it's a 7 out of 10, but for some reason I'm bringing it like my emotional, like George's emotion, like the phoenix inside me. I'm like, it's like a 2 out of 10, a 3 out of 10 because it pisses me off.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to come at this more objectively. I agree with you, Connor. I've said it earlier in the review. I need a little bit of more time to process it because maybe I'll come at this a little more measured. But right now, I'm just like, what a waste of fucking time, man.
Damn.
What a waste of time, Pixar.
So that is not
the return on investment would argue with that sentiment. But
they will make an absolute
The businessman,
bucket load.
the art versus commerce. The commerce side of this is the winner.
I mean,
sure.
if art was the prime driver behind this, then they would have just never made a fourth in general. I don't think that this movie adds enough to the overall franchise or the overall kind of story of Pixar that I would say that it is worth it.
That's probably it. Like that's a really good way to explain my general feelings.
I think that this might be a bit of a bold call, but looking at this, I think I would have almost rather them have not made this film at all, and just kept that from what I think is like a perfect trilogy.
I call this like Woody, a Toy Story tale.
No, I just don't think they should have. Like, I think in a perfect world, they would have never done the fourth one. But now that seeing as that they have, I'm glad that this is that we've got at least this.
It's not horrible.
Yeah. And it's not going to retroactively make me like the first three less. And I think that if anything, it adds enough to Woody's character that I might rewatch the first three and potentially get something a little bit more out of them. Potentially. But
I think I had a more negative reaction to they released a series of shorts after the third one over years, and I was like, just leave it. Like, these are so inconsequential. Yeah, like you don't need these. You had such a good end. So I think this is more worthwhile than those at least. So the perfect trilogy thing had already been a little tarnished for me by that point. So yeah.